Traore's 24B megadam deal is shaking the foundations of global infrastructure politics. In 2009, China promised to build a 6,000 megawatt hydroelectric dam in Burkina Faso, a project that was supposed to power the nation and irrigate millions of hectares of farmland. For 15 years, Beijing stalled issuing feasibility studies, delaying financing and never breaking ground. Then in 2023, everything changed. A single folder of Chinese delays was placed on the table in New Delhi. Prime Minister Modi read for 3 minutes, closed the file, and spoke 5 words that stunned the world. "We can start next month." The agreement he signed with Captain Ibrahim Traore was worth $24 billion, the largest infrastructure project in West African history, and promised 8,500 megawatts of clean energy, far more than China ever offered. The question is explosive. Why did China wait 15 years? Furthermore, what enabled India to make such a commitment in a mere 2 weeks? Traore's $24 billion megadam agreement did not materialize suddenly. A look back to the year 2000 is necessary to fully grasp its significance. That year, Chinese officials stood alongside Burkina Faso's leaders and promised a project that would change the Sahel forever. The Sahel Megadam. 6,000 megawatts of electricity, enough to power the entire country and sell energy to neighbors. 2 million hectares of farmland irrigated year-round, ending decades of drought cycles. 200,000 new jobs created through agriculture and industry. The deal was worth $7 billion at the time, and Beijing promised speed, expertise, and financing. Burkina Faso cleared 50,000 hectares of land to make way for the dam. 12 villages were relocated. Environmental impact agreements were signed. On paper, everything appeared to be set, yet for many years, no progress was made. In 2012, China requested more time for feasibility studies. In 2015, financing was suddenly under review. In 2018, technical assessments were restarted from zero. By 2020, Beijing used the pandemic as a justification for further delay. And by 2023, Chinese banks and officials simply stopped responding to phone calls. For ordinary Burkinabe citizens, the cost of these delays was devastating. Farmers watched crops fail as droughts grew harsher. Families continued to live without reliable electricity. Businesses collapsed because of constant blackouts. In the capital, power outages meant students had to study using candles. In the countryside, women and children had to travel for miles daily to get water. Fatou, a mother from Gorsi province, is one such individual. Every morning she walked 3 kilometers to reach a water source. Every second year her crops failed, pushing her family closer to hunger. Her oldest son left for Libya, searching for opportunities that did not exist at home. For Fatou, the promised dam was not an abstract project. It was survival. And then in 2023, Captain Ibrahim Traore decided to look for alternatives. He reached out to India. The response was immediate and shocking. Where China offered PowerPoint presentations, India sent engineers. Where Beijing mentioned the next business quarter, New Delhi talked about the following month. In just 2 weeks, Indian companies developed a complete construction proposal. The new design was not just larger, it was smarter. 8,500 megawatts of capacity delivered with AI-powered smart grids that would distribute electricity more efficiently than anything China had offered. Instead of vague political promises, India brought contracts with penalty clauses for delays and full technology transfer to Burkina engineers. The numbers behind Traore's 24BD megadam deal are staggering. $15 billion allocated to the dam complex itself, concrete, steel turbines, and transmission infrastructure. $4 billion for regional power grid connections linking Burkina Faso with 6 neighboring countries. $3 billion for irrigation systems, canals, pumping stations, and water distribution networks covering every province. And $2 billion was designated for industrial zones that would be powered by affordable electricity, enabling aluminum smelting, steel production, and new manufacturing centers that were previously unfeasible. The distinction was obvious. This wasn't aid money vanishing into government coffers. Stay with us because right after this, we'll reveal the hidden strategy behind Beijing's delay and why India's entry has rattled China's monopoly in Africa. Don't miss it. Subscribe now so you won't lose track of this unfolding story. To understand why Traore's 24B megadam deal matters, we have to look at why China stalled for so long. On the surface, Beijing blamed feasibility issues, financing delays, and technical challenges. But beneath the excuses, the strategy was clear. For 2 decades, China's Belt and Road Initiative built its influence in Africa on a simple premise. We are your only choice. Massive ports, railways, and dams were promised across the continent, but the pace was always under Beijing's control. Projects moved quickly only if they aligned with China's geopolitical goals. In situations like the one in Burkina Faso, the dam was intentionally never completed on schedule. Instead, it served as a political tool to maintain the country's dependence. By keeping the Sahel megadam in a state of perpetual delay, China asserted control over Burkina Faso's progress. No reliable electricity meant no large-scale industrialization. No irrigation meant agriculture stayed vulnerable to drought. A dependent economy meant Chinese loans. Chinese imports and Chinese contractors remained indispensable. Beijing's delays were not incompetence. They were strategy. That strategy began to collapse the moment Traore looked to India. Unlike Beijing's state-owned giants, New Delhi's partners were private firms with reputations at stake. Larsen and Toubro for construction, Pirat Heavy Electricals for turbines, Tata Power for operations. Each contract included strict performance guarantees and penalty clauses for delays. If deadlines were missed, the companies, not Burkina Faso, would bear the financial loss. The change was instantly noticeable. The difference was immediate. Within 2 weeks of receiving the geological surveys, Indian engineers produced a construction plan. By comparison, China had spent 15 years drafting new feasibility reports. While Beijing offered presentations, India offered solutions. And it wasn't just about speed. The Indian design was fundamentally superior. Instead of 6,000 megawatt, it promised 8,500. Instead of a basic hydroelectric facility, it included AI-powered smart grids capable of optimizing power distribution in real time. Predictive maintenance systems would prevent breakdowns before they happen. Smart sensors would track environmental effects and water flow in 5 different countries. Most significantly, India committed to a complete transfer of technology. Every plan, every algorithm, and every engineering specification would be shared with engineers from Burkina Faso. Within a decade, local specialists would be able to design and manage dams themselves. China, by contrast, kept knowledge locked inside state-owned companies, ensuring Africa could never operate without them. For ordinary citizens, these differences are not abstract. Take a mad to a taxi driver in Ouagadougou. His vehicle breaks down regularly because unstable electricity damages his battery charging systems. His children study by kerosene lamps during power cuts. Under the Indian plan, he will one day drive an electric taxi that charges reliably on clean power from the dam. His children will study under LED lights powered by water flowing through Indian turbines that are maintained by local Burkinabe technicians. This stark difference between what was promised and what was delivered is what has most unsettled Beijing. For years, China persuaded Africa that there were no other options. But Troy's 24BD Megam deal shattered that illusion overnight. It proved that Africa had choices, and those choices came with numbers China could not easily dismiss. $15 billion for the dam complex itself, $4 billion for regional power grids, $3 billion for irrigation systems, $2 billion for industrial zones, all tied to transparent contracts and real accountability. The deal also reshaped regional geopolitics by exporting power to 6 neighboring countries. Burkina Faso would become West Africa's energy hub. For the first time, an African nation could generate surplus electricity on a massive scale, creating leverage in regional negotiations. That level of influence was previously unimaginable under the stalled project from China. The message underneath was clear. Africa was no longer confined. Coming up, we'll reveal how Traore answered that offer and why his response sent shockwaves through Beijing and beyond. Stay with us and subscribe so you don't miss the next revelation. The announcement of Traore's 24B Mega-M deal triggered an immediate chain reaction across Africa and beyond. Within hours of the signing, Burkina media called it the project of the century. Crowds gathered outside government offices in Ouagadougou, cheering the possibility of reliable electricity for the first time in their lives. Farmers across the Sahel began calculating how many harvests year-round irrigation could bring. For a nation long held back by droughts and blackouts, the mood shifted from resignation to expectation. In Ghana, the energy minister publicly asked if similar projects could be negotiated with India. Nigeria's government contacted New Delhi to discuss hydroelectric partnerships. In Kenya, high-ranking officials asked for meetings to discuss renewable energy infrastructure. Suddenly, the monopoly that China had fostered for 2 decades was dissolving before their eyes. At a regional level, the consequences were immense. By connecting Burkina Faso's power grid to 6 neighbors, the dam would create a West African energy hub. Cheap, abundant electricity would allow industries across Mali, Niger, and Ghana to operate at levels previously impossible. Cotton processing, aluminum smelting data centers, all industries that depend on stable power, could now take root in the Sahel. Internationally, the reaction was no less intense. In Washington, policy analysts warned that U.S. influence in Africa was slipping. For decades, American officials assumed that if African nations did not turn to the West, they would inevitably rely on China. India's decisive action demonstrated that this was not the case. In Brussels, European leaders expressed concern about energy competition. A confidential report that was leaked indicated that if the Sahel mega dam is successful, African electricity exports could challenge Europe's own investments in renewable energy. And then came Beijing's furious response. Within 24 hours of the announcement, Chinese state media denounced the deal as financially reckless. 48 hours later, 3 Chinese delegations landed in Ouagadougou. Within 72 hours, the Chinese ambassador personally requested an emergency meeting with Burkina Faso's leadership. He came with a revised offer, $30 billion better terms, faster construction timelines, and promises of more advanced technology. But the response Traore gave stunned Beijing. He asked the ambassador a single question. Where were these capabilities for the last 15 years? The room went quiet as there was no reply. The abrupt availability of resources, expertise, and a sense of urgency only confirmed what many in Burkina Faso had long suspected. For ordinary citizens, this realization was as important as the project itself. In Ouagadougou, Amadou, the taxi driver, summed it up simply. If they had the money all along, why did we spend 15 years in the dark? His frustration was echoed by countless families who had endured rolling blackouts, crop failures, and poverty while China played for time. The contrast between immediate Indian action and China's years of delay created a powerful narrative across Africa: partnership versus exploitation. Where Beijing offered dependence, New Delhi offered autonomy. Where China withheld technology, India promised transfer. Where China delayed, India constructed. However, beneath the enthusiasm, new questions started to surface. If a single dam could cause such global unrest, what would occur when the initial turbines start to operate? Would Western powers accept Africa's new independence and infrastructure? Would China escalate to protect its influence? And could Burkina Faso manage the immense pressure now placed on its shoulders? These questions set the stage for the next phase of the story, because just as the celebrations were spreading, a confidential European report leaked to the press. Its contents revealed why Brussels, Washington, and Beijing all view this single dam as a threat far greater than most Burkinabe citizens realize. In a moment, we'll uncover that leaked report and show you why European officials believe Traore's 24 BDI megadam deal could destabilize their entire energy strategy. Stay with us and do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss what is coming next. The leaked European report gave the world a glimpse of just how disruptive Traore's 24B mega deal could become. Marked confidential and circulated only among senior EU officials, the document warned that West Africa's new energy hub could upend Europe's green transition plans. The logic was stark. Europe has spent billions building wind farm solar arrays and LG import terminals to secure its energy independence. But if Burkina Faso, powered by India's engineering, begins exporting cheap electricity across the Sahel and beyond European markets, could face competition they never anticipated. The report stated bluntly the completion of the Sahel Medem represents a structural risk to European energy security. The document went further. It cautioned that China's control over African infrastructure had enabled Europe to plan with predictable schedules and manage reliance. The emergence of India as a competitor has shattered those assumptions. Brussels suddenly confronted a situation where Africa was no longer just a passive source of resources, but an active rival. This was not just about Burkina Faso's development. It was about the balance of power in global energy. If West Africa could harness and export electricity independently, Europe's leverage over African economies would shrink. Its investments in renewables would face price competition. Its strategic influence in the Sahel would erode. Inside European ministries, alarms were ringing, yet the report remained classified until it leaked. When African journalists published its contents, reactions spread like wildfire. Citizens in Ouagadougou, Era, and Lagos asked the same question. Why does Europe fear African electricity? At the same time, analysts in Washington expressed their own worries. Pentagon officials pointed out that AI-powered smart grids and secure energy sources could also facilitate the modernization of African militaries. If the Sahel Mega delivered on its promises, Burkina Faso could gain strategic autonomy in ways that challenge long-standing Western assumptions. The leaked report left one haunting question hanging over the entire project. If Traore's 24D meme deal threatens the economic interests of Europe, the geopolitical influence of China, and the strategic calculations of the United States, who will try to stop it? Coming up next, we'll reveal the evidence of how Beijing and Western powers are already maneuvering behind the scenes and why their counterattacks may fail. Stay with us and subscribe now so you don't miss the next critical chapter. The leaked European report posed a chilling question. Who will attempt to halt the Sahel megadam? The answer arrived quickly through counterproposals, warnings, and propaganda efforts. The leaked European report asked a frightening question. Who will try to stop the Sahel megadam? The answer came swiftly in the form of counteroffers, warnings, and propaganda campaigns. China struck first. Stung by the global headlines around Korea's 24B megadam deal, Beijing launched a diplomatic blitz. 3 highly delegations arrived in Ouagadougou within days, carrying a revised proposal worth $30 billion. It included promises of faster construction timelines, new environmental safeguards, and access to advanced Chinese turbine technology. On paper, it looked superior to India's offer. But a significant issue existed: trust. For a decade and a half, China had made similar commitments. Farmers were moved, land was prepared, and agreements were finalized, yet nothing was ever constructed. Burkina Faso's leaders asked the obvious question if Beijing could deliver all this. Now, why didn't they deliver it before? No Chinese official had a convincing answer. The sudden urgency only highlighted years of deliberate stalling. Western officials also raised objections. Analysts in Washington and Brussels claimed that Burkina Faso was walking into a debt trap with India. They warned that $24 billion in infrastructure spending could destabilize the country's finances. Critics pointed to environmental risks, arguing that a dam of this scale could displace communities, disrupt ecosystems, and harm biodiversity. However, in this case, the specifics of the Indian agreement were crucial. Unlike standard Chinese loans, India's financial arrangement was a partnership. Payments were directly linked to construction progress, with penalties for any delays. For the first time, Burkina Bay engineers would not just watch foreigners build. They would learn to replicate and manage the technology themselves. Environmental concerns were also addressed differently. India integrated AI-driven water flow management, predictive maintenance systems, and environmental monitoring sensors throughout the design. These tools would allow real-time oversight of water levels, turbine efficiency, and ecological impacts. Rather than ignoring environmental risks, the project incorporated them into its core operations. On the financial front, Burkina Faso's government emphasized that this was not aid money flowing into bureaucratic accounts. It was a focused investment. $15 billion for the dam, $4 billion for regional grid connections, $3 billion for irrigation, and $2 billion for industrial zones. Every dollar was linked to infrastructure designed to produce revenue over the long term. Instead of being a drain on resources, the project was set to increase them. Perhaps most importantly, the deal came with tangible human benefits. 80,000 jobs during construction, 2 million hectares of irrigated farmland, 50 million people across the region gaining reliable access to electricity. These were not abstract projections. They were measurable outcomes for citizens like Amadou, the taxi driver in Ouagadougou. Those outcomes matter more than geopolitical arguments. Reliable electricity means no more battery damage, no more nights by kerosene lamps. For farmers like Fatou, it means triple harvests and the return of children who once migrated abroad. These narratives provided a compelling response to the vague warnings about debt traps and environmental dangers. Opponents also argued that India was merely substituting one monopoly for another. However, the structure of the deal also refuted that claim. The contracts encourage regional integration with grid connections linking 6 neighboring countries. Training centers in Ouagadougou would welcome engineers from across West Africa. Rather than centralizing control, the project was designed to multiply expertise across the continent. Step by step, the criticisms began to lose force. Chinese counteroffers looked like desperate attempts to reclaim influence. Western warnings sounded like excuses to maintain control. And through it all, the numbers tied to Traore's 24B mega dam deal spoke louder than rhetoric. 8,500 megawatts of capacity. 15 years of delays were replaced by 6 years of action. Secrecy gave way to transparent contracts. The benefits were unmistakable. But this victory also raised new questions. Could Burkina Faso manage the immense pressure of being a regional energy hub? Would rival powers escalate their efforts to undermine the project? And what happens when the first megawatt of electricity flows through the turbines in 2030? Up next, we'll explore how ordinary Burkina-based citizens are preparing for this transformation and why their hopes could reshape the destiny of an entire continent. Don't go anywhere. Subscribe now so you'll be here when the story continues. By the time the dust settled, one thing was clear. Traore's $24 billion mega dam deal represented more than just a building project. It was a plan for change, not just in Burkina Faso, but throughout West Africa. At a local level, the changes were already evident in the initial planning. New technical colleges funded through the agreement began enrolling students in electrical engineering and hydromechanics. Among them was Mariam, a 19-year-old from a farming family in Burkina. For most of her life, she had watched her parents struggle with unreliable harvests and endless power cuts. Now she is studying turbine operations, preparing to work at the very dam that will power her community. "I don't want to leave my country to find work," she said. "I want to build it here." Mariam's story represents a larger shift. For decades, many of Africa's most talented individuals moved overseas, looking for better prospects in Europe, America, or Asia. However, with new technical training facilities in Ouagadougou and guaranteed jobs in emerging industrial areas, the brain drain might finally be reversed. Skills would not only stay in Burkina Faso, they would multiply across the continent. In rural areas, farmers were preparing for irrigation canals that would deliver water to 2 million hectares of land. Agricultural experts projected that yields could triple with cotton maize and rice becoming year-round staples. Processing plants planned near the canals would allow crops to be turned into finished goods, locally rather than being exported raw. That means higher profits for farmers and more jobs for their children. Industrial benefits were just as striking. The $2 billion allocated for energy-intensive zones would support aluminum, smelting steel manufacturing, and data centers, all powered by cheap, clean electricity from the dam. For the first time, Burkina Faso could transition from exporting raw bauxite to manufacturing finished aluminum and from selling cotton to producing textiles. Instead of contributing to prosperity in other countries, resources would fuel domestic industries. At the national level, the Sahel Miadam positioned Burkina Faso as a regional hub. By exporting electricity to 6 neighboring countries, the nation would earn foreign currency and strengthen diplomatic leverage. Energy cooperation would tie economies together, making the region less vulnerable to external shocks. Regionally, the project created a model that other countries could follow. Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya were already in talks with Indian firms about similar deals. The concept was simple but revolutionary: infrastructure, not as dependency, but as partnership. Instead of waiting for Western loans or Chinese delays, African nations could pursue accountable, transparent agreements that delivered both power and knowledge. Globally, the consequences were significant. Europe was confronted with the possibility of losing its energy influence over Africa. China witnessed the decline of its Belt and Road narrative. The United States expressed concern about the growing strategic independence of a region it had previously considered dependent. Every megawatt generated by the Sahel Medam symbolized not just electricity, but autonomy. And for ordinary citizens, the meaning was deeply personal. Amadou, the taxi driver, imagined his children studying under bright lights instead of smoky lamps. Fatou, the farmer, envisioned her son returning from Libya to work in a food processing plant built near the new irrigation canals. Ibrahim, the student, looked forward to operating turbines that her parents had once thought impossible. These stories were not isolated. They were echoes of a broader transformation. When ordinary people gain access to dependable electricity, water, and employment, entire societies start to shift. Poverty rates fall, education levels rise, migration decreases, and hope takes the place of despair. The solutions incorporated into Traore's $24 billion mega deal were not merely technical, they were human. By ensuring transparency, accountability, and technology transfer, the project promised something Africa had rarely received a fair chance. But this also opened a new frontier of questions. If one dam could create such ripple effects, what would happen when the model was replicated across the continent? Would external powers attempt to sabotage it? Could Africa protect its new independence as global competition intensifies? In our final chapter, we'll pull together the internal, regional, and global meanings of this deal and reveal why the real battle may only be beginning. Stay tuned and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion. Traore's 24 beer megadam deal is more than a contract. It is a turning point. At the internal level, Burkina Faso is preparing to power homes, irrigate fields, and build industries that will keep its youth working at home rather than migrating abroad. Families like Fatou's, Amadou's, and Mariam's will experience a transformation in their daily lives due to reliable electricity, water, and new opportunities. At the regional level, the dam establishes Burkina Faso as an energy hub, exporting power to 6 neighboring countries and strengthening the economic ties within West Africa. For the first time, a landlocked nation in the Sahel will have significant influence in regional trade, not as a mere supplier of raw materials, but as a creator of prosperity. At the global level, the project signals the end of monopolies. China's long-standing dominance in African infrastructure is no longer secure. Europe and the United States must now reckon with a continent capable of choosing its own partners on its own terms. Every megawatt generated by the Sahel megadam represents a step toward a multipolar world where Africa is not a subject, but a stakeholder. But the biggest question remains if one dam can shift regional geopolitics. What will happen when this model spreads across Africa? What will it mean for Europe's energy strategy, for China's Belt and Road Initiative, and for America's global dominance? That is the story we will explore next. How Africa's new infrastructure partnerships could reshape the world order itself. If you want to follow that journey, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Join us as we uncover the next chapter in Africa's transformation. And remember, Africa bows to no